Hello everyone and welcome, of course, to the York Festival Ideas event. My name is Alicia Madalena. I am an associate lecturer at the University of York in medieval literature, actually, but I have a toe in ancient Roman literature, so very excited to be here, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all as well. So it is my great pleasure indeed to introduce our speaker, Jane Draycott. Jane is an historian, author, and archaeologist. She has written on ancient Rome and Egypt and is currently a senior lecturer at the University of Glasgow. She is also the co-director of the university's Games and Gaming Lab. Her most recent book, which Jane is here to discuss today, offers an unfamiliar look into ancient Rome, one where women played a crucial role in Rome's violent transition from a republic to the dictatorship of the Roman Empire. And we're delighted that Jane is joining us today to talk about her book, Fulvia, the woman who broke all the rules in ancient Rome. Jane, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming along to hear me talk and, escaping the heat. So maybe I'm doing you a favour. I don't know. Anyway, so how do you solve a problem like Fulvia? And I should preface this with a disclaimer that I personally don't think that Fulvia herself was a problem. Although the ancient authors who wrote about her, who we will get to very shortly, would beg to differ, including it's meant to have a thing, but it doesn't have a thing. Okay, the head, the person who owns the head on the cover of the book, he would definitely beg to differ. So rather than a problem, I personally think that Fulvia is more of a challenge because the historical and archaeological evidence for her, that's the problem, frankly, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So, who was Fulvia? Now, we know about Fulvia much the same as we know about other women of her time and of her position in society. We know the basic facts of her life. So we don't know exactly when she was born. We know roughly when she was born, so it's around 80 BCE, sort of the beginning of the first part of the first century BCE, towards the end of the Republic, but not quite at the fall of it. We do know that she died in 40 BCE, although again, we don't know specifically when. So we know roughly she had about 40 years of life, and she did use them well, I think. We know about her family ties in the broadest sense. So her father was a member of the Fulvii, and her mother was a member of the Sempronii. And these are two they were once very prominent Roman aristocratic families. They had consuls and successful politicians and generals, a century or so prior to Fulvia's life. But by the time that she's born, they've basically dwindled into insignificance. They're still very wealthy because everybody in the Roman elite is at this point in time, but they're not really doing anything much with that wealth until Fulvia. We know she was married 3 times. This is the basic fact that you know about an ancient Roman woman, especially one of high status. If you don't know anything else, you know she was married because there really wasn't any other option for her. And we know the 3 men that she married: Publius Clodius Pulcher, Gaius Scribonius Curio, Marcus Antonius. 2 of those may or may not be familiar to you, but Marcus Antonius, Marc Antony, as we know him, probably is familiar to most people, even if they don't know very much about Roman history at all. And we know that she had 5 children, so pretty good to have been pregnant and given birth at least 5 times and survived all of that in this period. So she has 2 children with her first husband, Clodius. She has 1 child with her second husband, Curio, and she has 2 children with her third husband, Antony. So these are the basic facts. But we know quite a bit more, especially about a couple of distinct periods of her life. And we know about these periods of her life because ancient authors write about them. And they write about them because, they're not very happy about what she's doing during this time. You know that an ancient author is happy about a woman if he never mentions her. So if any woman gets mentioned in ancient sources, it's generally in a negative sense because she has misbehaved in some way according to the chap that is holding the stylus and writing the history. So especially in this period, the last gasp of the Republic, the fall of the Republic, the civil wars, the beginning of the empire, we tend to hear, well, we only hear about women when they're doing something bad, because there are far more interesting things our ancient authors think they're to write about. So they want to write about the Senate and the politics and the army and the battles and the assassinations. Who cares what women are doing? They're not part of that, except when they are, like Fulvia, and then, of course, it's a terrible thing. So, Fulvia then is, although she's not necessarily singular in what she's doing at this time, as I've said, she marries, she has children, she does the sort of high-status Roman female things like runs her household. So that's not unusual. Other Roman women are doing things like that. Caesar's wife is doing that, Cicero's wife is doing that, and so on. Yet, what we find is that Fulvia is subjected to a huge amount of vitriol by the ancient authors that talk about her. And I've put some of these up on the slide because these were used in the marketing campaign for my book, because my publishers thought, well, that makes her sound really cool. And I'll tell you something. Originally, the book wasn't going to be called Fulvia, the woman who broke all the rules in ancient Rome. It was going to be called A Thoroughly Rapacious Woman. And my editors, they did a bit of sort of workshopping around the office, and apparently people thought that sounded like erotica. And it's not particularly erotic, this story, unless you've got very, very specific ideas about that. So yes, I didn't want people to get confused. Buy the book, think they're getting something steamy, especially in this era of romantasy, and then they just get the straightforward history. So we changed it. We thought that Fulvia, the woman who broke all the rules in ancient Rome, was more fitting because, as I shall say in this talk, she does break a lot of rules, at least the rules that are applied to women, not necessarily the rules that are applied to men. So the person that starts this off really is Cicero. He is writing during her lifetime. He is a peer of hers, and so he writes about her. He talks about her in his speeches. He talks about her in his letters. These all get written down, and then they get sort of edited and circulated later. And so he is the reason that we have so much information about the late Republic, especially the years surrounding the assassination of Caesar and what happens after that. And so he starts it. He doesn't like her at all. And then because he sort of sets this precedent, we then get the later writers who are drawing on his writing and these sort of generally understood periods of this history. They just kind of continue and they add in extra details. So we have Livy, who you may have heard of as the historian of the early years of Rome, but they're basically mythology and made up. He lived at the same time as Fulvia, but he was a bit younger, and he wrote about her after her death. Velleius Paterculus, a generation later, he's writing in the sort of late 1st century BC, mid 1st century CE. Plutarch, a century later, he's writing a biography of Antony, Fulvia's husband. So, of course, Fulvia features quite a bit in that biography. And then we get Suetonius, again, over a century later. He's writing lives of the Caesars, the emperors. So he writes about Fulvia in relation to Marc Antony and Octavian, who would become Augustus, the first Roman emperor. And then we have other historians, Florus, over a century later, Cassius Dio, 2 centuries later. Cassius Dio really is where it gets really sort of colourful and lurid. He's clearly got quite the imagination as well as this sort of historical mind. It's like reading a novel quite often. So we have a lot of ancient authors spending their time and energy assassinating her character, basically. She's literally the worst woman that ever lived. She's such a bad woman that she's not a woman at all. The only thing womanly about her is the fact that she is a woman. All of her sort of character and personality and behaviour is male and masculine and transgressive, and it's just not okay. So we have all this information about all the terrible things that she did, and I will talk about these terrible things and give you the details, the gory details, in a minute. but we don't even know what she looked like. So we don't have any portraits of her that are securely identified, assuming any were ever made. We do have these coins like this. These were issued by Antony in the late 40s, so in the last few years of Fulvia's life. And it's been suggested that the winged victory on these coins is modelled after Fulvia, because she's got the sort of the typical hairstyle of the time, and she looks more like an actual real woman than an idealised goddess figure. So maybe this is Fulvia, or at least a version of her, because of course ancient portraits aren't photographs. Scholars argue about this. They don't, there's no consensus about this, but it's tempting, because otherwise we don't know what she looked like. And it's unfortunate, really, because we know what other Roman women of this slightly later look like. So this is a coin that Antony issued depicting a portrait of his next wife, Octavia. So she is on the right-hand side there. And another one of the pair of them together, and also Cleopatra. He issued coins of himself and Cleopatra. So Antony likes putting his wives on his coins. And so if we go back, if this is Fulvia, that makes her the earliest real-life Roman woman to ever appear on a coin, which is quite a nice little thing to have on your Wikipedia page, or in the absence of a tombstone. But like I said, we don't know for sure, whereas we do know these are Octavia and Cleopatra. So we don't know what she looked like, and we don't have really a description of her appearance. So this is really quite unfortunate, because this is just before we start getting portraits of named Roman women. So these are Octavia and Livia. These are, Octavia is Antony's next wife. She is also the sister of Octavian. Livia is the wife of Octavian, who goes on to be Augustus. So we have lots of portraits of them, because they're part of the imperial family, but we don't have portraits of Fulvia. We have one account of someone making fun of her appearance. Apparently, on one occasion, her face was a little bit lopsided. Who knows why? And we have, apparently her personality is quite serious. Antony tries to lighten her up by, playing practical jokes on her. There's this story about how he's on the run, people are trying to kill him, she's worried for his life. He sneaks back into the city, pretending to be a slave in disguise with a letter, and basically comes to the house to give her this letter. She's like, oh, I need this news, give me the letter. And then he basically is like, ha, it's me! And that's exactly not what you really want at that particular moment when you're distraught over your husband and his possible communication. But it gets told in two separate accounts for different reasons, to try and do different things with Antony's character. So it probably happened, but what can we take from that about Fulvia? She was very patient with her man-child husband. This is what I like to think she looked like, because this is an anonymous sort of marble portrait statue in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's described as an elderly Roman woman. I'm like, well, okay, I guess 40 was elderly during the Roman period, but it has the same hairstyle as the coin goddess. So, if I were going to imagine Fulvia, I would imagine her, I suppose, as looking somewhat like this, especially if she's annoyed with Antony at the time. She tends to get left out of the films and the TV shows and everything else of this period, because I suppose it's thought that audiences, it's too many women, too many female characters. It's too confusing to have her and Octavia and Cleopatra. So if anyone ever asked me about casting, I would say cast Rachel Weisz. I think she would be great, especially considering her recent TV and film roles, that she has been trying to tell women's stories, untold women's stories. And she did also, sort of about 15 years ago, which is where this is from, she appeared in a film called Agora as the philosopher Hypatia of Alexandria. So she knows how to do ancient stuff. So I'm not going to give you a narrative really of Fulvia's life, because there simply isn't time, and well, then you wouldn't read my book. But what I am going to do is highlight a couple of episodes in this in her life, in this very tumultuous period of history, which I think we can think about what the sources tell us was happening and was it actually what was happening. So the first one then, this is in 52 BCE. So this is the death of Claudius. Clodius, in fact, well, he started off as Claudius. He renamed himself Clodius because he thought it was cooler. Yeah. He was a populist politician / rabble-rousing thug, depending on who you really sort of believe in the accounts of this period. He got into an ongoing feud with many people, but the most important one is the one that leads to his death. He gets murdered by his rival Milo. And so this happens outside of Rome. His body gets brought back to the city, taken to his house. Fulvia is there. She sees it. She receives the body. Now, the normal thing to do for a Roman woman in this period would be to have the body sort of washed and dressed and anointed and laid out publicly in the atrium of the house for everyone to come and pay their respects to it. But she doesn't do this. She doesn't do anything even remotely like what is expected of her. So what she does is she throws open the doors of the house and invites all of the commoners who never normally would get to go into an aristocratic house. She invites them in and she's like, look at that. You know, he's covered in blood, he's covered in mud, well, it's an Italian summer, so, you know, you can imagine how just horrible the sight is. And she triggers a riot. She sends off the common people. They take Clodius's body with them all the way down to the forum, and they riot, they smash up the center of Rome. They go looking for Milo and his accomplices to try and get revenge. Martial law and curfew and all those things have to be instituted so that things can calm down. And we hear about this from Cicero, funnily enough, because he is quite good friends with Milo. He also hates Clodius himself. They have an ongoing feud. And he defends Milo at the murder trial, unsuccessfully, I might add. But we know from his speech, he mentions a couple of things about Fulvia in the speech. He says that she and Clodius were never apart. So it's really suspicious that on the day of the murder, Clodius is without Fulvia. His strategy is to victim blame and basically say Milo had to kill Clodius because if Clodius would have killed him first. And the reason we know that he was out there with murder on his mind is because Fulvia wasn't with him. His strategy doesn't really work. So he doesn't get away with it. He loses the court case. Milo gets exiled. But we get additional information in commentaries on his speech later. And so we hear that Fulvia actually testified at the trial, which is a very unusual thing for Roman women to do. And we also hear that Milo apparently tried to kill their son at the same time. So we can sort of think about how that might have, why doesn't Cicero mention this? I wonder. Makes Milo look a little bit less innocent. And so we can think about, well, what is it like for a woman to have her husband brutally murdered and her child threatened? And apparently Milo went to the house and killed a slave by mistake. He thought it was the son. It wasn't, it was a slave. And so her son was very endangered. And so we can perhaps understand some of her actions later in her life, where she works very hard to look after her husbands and look after her children and preserve the family wealth as well, because, of course, she's had this experience earlier on. So if we flash forward 9 years or so to 43 BCE, so this is just after Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44, and we see an alliance made between Antony and Caesar's nephew Octavian and a third man, Lepidus. This is called the Second Triumvirate, and what these guys want to do is get revenge on the people that assassinated Caesar. They call themselves the Liberators, but obviously Caesar's friends and family are not going to call them that. They want to hunt them down and assassinate them, but to do that they need money. And so they basically draw up a hit list, and they put all the names on this list of their enemies, of anybody that they think is rich. And surprising no one, Cicero is on this list because he was not very happy about Caesar and the dictatorship. he's also threatened Antony. He goes around loudly saying that, if he'd had his way, Antony would have been assassinated too. And if he'd been included in the conspiracy, he'd have organized it better so that Antony would die. Who does that and doesn't expect some kind of reprisal? Well, what happens to Cicero is he does get hunted down, he does get caught, he gets executed, and his head gets cut off and he gets taken back to Rome to prove that he has been executed. Because in this period, if you're on the hit list, it's basically open season on you. Anyone can kill you. They cut off your head, they bring it back to the triumvirate to prove they've done it, and they get a percentage of your fortune. And so the person who killed Cicero did this. And this is where we get probably the most famous episode from Fulvia's life, the one that takes up the most space in the ancient accounts of her. And it is that she looks at the head of Cicero and she's really, really happy, that the guy who had a feud with her first husband and a second husband and a third husband and defended the murderer of her first husband, she's really happy he's dead, as anyone would be, really. And it gets such a lot of stuff written about it in the ancient sources. It also gets a lot of recreations in art. So we have this one. Here she's looking at the head. Here she's touching the head. This one she's going to, really do stuff to the head. And in this one she has done stuff to the head and then is kind of keeping it like a little trophy there. And this is when I said earlier that Cassius Dio was a novelist, he really gives us loads of details about how she whips a hairpin out of her hair and is stabbing the head and stabbing the tongue and, abusing the head and spitting on it and all the rest of it. That doesn't appear in the earlier sources. So like I said, Cassius has got quite the imagination, but authors really like it. It's a really exciting little vignette to paint. So again, is there any truth in this? I mean, I think it's fair for her to be happy he's dead. Considering Roman religious beliefs about, voodoo dolls and trying to sort of curse people so that they don't hurt you, I think it's potentially reasonable to, poke the head a bit with a hairpin. I don't know if any of this is true, but, you can see if you start to add some context to this, then, it makes a bit more sense. And then finally, the third episode that's really quite famous. This is the Perusian War from 41 to 40 BCE. And Antony is off in the east doing political and military things and also romancing Cleopatra at this time, leaving Fulvia back in Rome to protect his interests, along with his brother, who is the consul at the time. And so the pair of them are attempting to keep Antony's soldiers and veterans allied with him, to stop Octavian tempting them away with offers of land and farms and stuff like that. They're trying to protect Antony's sons, who once again, the children are being threatened, because if you want to get to a Roman, you first attack his masculinity, and then you attack his actual, male heirs who can carry on his name. And so there is a war, there is a civil war in Italy. Lucius and the army of sort of Antony supporters get besieged in Perugia. And Fulvia, again, in the literary accounts, they gradually get more and more elaborate. First she's presenting the boys to the soldiers to try and get their sympathy. Then it's she's paying for armies. Then it's she's actually leading the armies. She's strapped on some armor. She's waving a sword around. She's pretending to be a soldier. This is horrific as far as the Roman authors are concerned, this woman doing these things. And we know that this isn't really true. We know that she's not in Perugia during the siege. We know that she's somewhere else. But we get some archaeological evidence here of bullets, lead sling bullets, that were exchanged by both sides. So archaeological excavation around the city of Perugia has found these bullets, because of course lead doesn't deteriorate, it stays in the ground. And they've got inscriptions on them in much the same way that modern, what do you call them when they fly the planes? Not the pilots, but the RAF, those type people who during the Second World War or other conflicts, they would paint on the side of the bombs that they were then going to drop on various cities. this is what the Romans are doing too. They are carving little messages into these sling bullets. And you're not going to read them because, if you get hit by a sling bullet, you're not going to be in a position to read anything. It's basically like being shot in the face with a gun today. But they do this, and it gives us an insight into the kind of things that they're all talking about, the kind of things they're shouting about across the barricades. And there are some really nasty, obscene, abusive messages directed at Fulvia here. And why? She's not even there. But it's part of the sort of the propaganda surrounding this conflict that she is the general, and that if a woman is being a general, something has gone terribly wrong. So, we need to take all of our sources, whether they are literary sources, such as the histories or the letters or the speeches, whether they are archaeological sources, such as the sling bullets, we need to take them with a pinch of salt anyway. Any good historian will tell you that. But when it comes to the ones that mention women, we really need not just a pinch of salt, but a load more salt than that. Because the authors of these works, and a lot of the producers of this kind of archaeological evidence, they are almost all men. And they are men that have been raised in a deeply sexist and even misogynistic society where the ideal woman is an invisible one. She is a silent one. She literally does nothing except be chaste and then get married and then still be chaste but still have babies. And so a woman like Fulvia, yes, she marries and she has babies. That's great. But she does all this other stuff as well. She's highly visible. She is parading around the city with her husband. She's getting involved in their politics, in their feuds, in their military activities. She is paying for things that are not particularly female things to pay for, like armies. And so she is not just a woman on her own, she is also a symbol of how things in society have gone so very wrong. Why is the Republic collapsing? It's because the women have gotten out of the kitchen. I paraphrase, but that is why it's all gone wrong. All of the ways that ancient women are supposed to behave, they are not doing that anymore. And so in order to try and fix things, one of the first things that Octavian does when he becomes the Emperor Augustus is he starts laying down the law about what women can and can't do. So he's very concerned about restoring traditional values. So there is all of that. And for me, that makes Fulvia a fascinating person to think about and to read about, to write about, because it's interesting for what the sources tell us. It's interesting for what they don't tell us, the selective details that they include or they exclude and that you get in other accounts. And it's also interesting for what we can try and infer if we read between the lines of these sources. And so for me then, doing that is how you would solve a problem like Fulvia. And just as a sort of final point, I think one of the interesting things to do when you're looking at history is to try and be a little bit counterfactual and think about how things might have been different. And so for me, one of the indicators of how important Fulvia is in this period and how important her actions are is to think about what happens if she hadn't died when she did. So she dies in 40 BCE. And I won't go into a huge amount of detail about it, but pretty much everything starts going wrong for Antony immediately. He's really bad at managing himself and his publicity, his PR, his marketing, etc. And if Fulvia had still been alive, things would not have gone so badly wrong for him. He would not have been presented as, the love affair with Cleopatra would not have been presented the way it was. He wouldn't have alienated Romans, all of his allies to himself. He wouldn't have been left all alone in Alexandria 10 years later. But again, I can, if you want to know about that, I can talk about that in the questions. And it's also, I talk about it in my book as well. So, thank you very much, everybody.
And thank you very much, Jane. Excellent, lovely stuff. really wonderful. I have lots of questions, but I will, of course, allow the audience to jump in first. So we will have some time for questions now. Who would like to begin? I'll look to the audience right here. Thank you. Oh yes, we will have our stewards have microphones they'll bring to you.
If she was developing a reputation as such a difficult woman, why did husbands 2 and 3 want to marry her?
Exactly. So this is one of the things that you, again, we sort of have to try and infer because we don't specifically get told. But presumably the reason that she and Clodius spent so much time together is because they actually liked each other's company. They enjoyed each other's company. They had a real partnership, not just an arranged marriage. And so with husbands 2 and 3, presumably there was something there as well. So she is obviously very rich, very, very rich. So the reason that husband number 1 marries her is partly because of her wealth. He needs the money. So presumably husbands 2 and 3, similar things. Political careers are expensive. But the interesting thing about husbands 2 and 3 is, so Curio and Antony are childhood friends. There is even scurrilous gossip that at one point they had a romantic relationship with each other. And so I like to think that one of the reasons that Antony marries Fulvia after Curio's death is that Curio and Fulvia hadn't been married for very long, but just long enough to have a baby, have a little boy. And then Curio dies fighting for Caesar in North Africa. And so I think it's possible that in addition to the money and the political alliances that Fulvia would bring to their marriage, I think Antony just wanted to do his dead best friend a bit of a solid and look after his wife and look after his son. And we know that they have a close relationship because years later, when Antony is defeated in Egypt and Antony dies, Fulvia's son, Curio's son, is with him in Egypt and is one of the people who is executed there, along with Antony's and Fulvia's son. So clearly he and his stepfather had a good relationship. So I think, there's money, there's politics, and there's just, doing something nice for your dead best friend as well. And yeah, she can't have been that awful if all these men wanted to live with her and marry her and let her into their political lives.
And of course she, did things, didn't she, to further her husband's career?
Absolutely.
Right? She was good for her husband.
She was good for her husbands, yeah. She when they were out of Rome, she was running their businesses, basically, running their estates, seeing people in their stead. So they trusted her, too, to actually be getting on without them.
Okay, thank you. There was a question just back there in the blue and then at the front of the white.
This is a bit more of a general women question, but did having children from previous marriages make remarriage more difficult, like it kind of does now, or being rich?
No, if anything, it made it. Oh, didn't I say I would probably end up doing that? It's something that's, for the Romans, divorce is really easy. So marriage is easy. You don't have to have a wedding necessarily. You just have to say, right, we're going to live together. That's it. You're married. Likewise, divorce is easy. I'm not going to live with you anymore. I'm off. It's done. So this happens all the time with the members of the higher classes. They marry for political reasons. And so if the political alliance stops serving you, marriage over, marry someone else. Men and women. So women have the same sort of power. They can divorce as well. And so we hear about people wanting to contract marriages so that their children will be half brothers. It's always about the boys. It's about the political alliances in the next generation. So we even get a bit of wife swapping. That men will, so one man will say to another man, look, I would really like it if I could marry your wife so that we can have a kid, and my kid and your kid will be brothers, and so this stuff happens, and so probably there were, difficulties with blended families in the same way that kids just fight over toys and everything else, but at the same time, that's not really something that the parents really needed to concern themselves about, because they have many houses, they have domestic staff that look after the children, so they don't really need to be bothered with it in the way that today, if you have sort of step siblings that hate each other, it's horrible for everybody. And also, I should say, I suppose as well, that when there are children of a divorce, it's the man that gets them. In the Roman period, the children are the property of the father. So potentially the mother never gets to see them again if the divorce is acrimonious and the father feels vindictive. But yeah, again, we don't hear so much about that side of it, because the people who are writing the histories, they don't care about kids. You know, they really don't pay attention to babies and children. We don't know a huge amount about even important people's childhoods, because they don't believe that what happens to you as a child affects you as an adult. They basically believe that you came into the world as you're going to be. So there's not this idea of experiences forming character. So they don't write about children.
Thank you. There's a question down here. We'll just grab you a microphone, just so everybody
I
can.
might not need one, I can project quite well.
Just for the people in the back. Thank you.
Okay, hello. I just wanted to ask about her background, that she made this illustrious marriage, that she was rich. It sounds like she was actually really quite either coached or very educated. So what is her background to get her in that sphere to then carry on and create this legacy, this amazing sort of, you know,
This is
legacy?
actually a great question to come after that one, because the reason that she's in this position, so she comes from two very wealthy families, and she is really the final member of both. So she has two lots of money. Her father he's rich, but he's not very important. He's got a speech impediment, so he can't actually be a politician or a general because of the speech impediment. And he gets mocked in Cicero's speeches for this. But her parents...
reason to be pleased he died.
I know, I'm so
That's
pleased.
the dad.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. So her parents then, they're rich, but they get divorced. And her mother marries a very important general and consul, and it's that man who he knows Clodius. Clodius has served under him in the army in the East. And so, again, we don't know this because the sources don't specifically spell it out, but we can infer that this is where that link with Clodius comes from, through her stepfather. And at the same time, Clodius has been a rather naughty boy, and he's committed religious sacrilege by sneaking into women-only religious rites disguised as a woman and getting caught. And the suggestion was he did it to try and seduce Caesar's wife because she is hosting this party. Doesn't really matter why he did it. He commits this religious sacrilege. And so he doesn't get found guilty when he's tried for it because he apparently bribes the sort of jury on it. But everyone knows he did it. And it does mean that, would you want your sweet little daughter marrying someone who committed sacrilege? No, you wouldn't. So that the higher level, very important aristocratic daughters are off the table for him. Whereas here's this one, she's still very rich, you know, and so this is an opportunity for her family to align themselves with his family, who are aristocratic and rich, as opposed to just rich.
Thanks. I don't want to miss anyone up at the back. I'm not wearing glasses. Is there anyone up there I'm not seeing? No, we're okay. All right. I see a hand here. Yes. We'll just wait for the microphone if we could. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Very interesting Roman history. How did she die?
Well, this is actually quite tragic. We don't know how she specifically died because, again, they don't tend to talk about the causes of death of women unless it's, you know, a very tragic death in childbirth or something like that. After the war that she and her brother-in-law fight against Octavian, they lose and they have to flee Italy. So she goes to Greece to meet Antony. And he's coming from Egypt to Greece. She's coming from Italy to Egypt. So they meet in Greece, and he's really angry that he doesn't really appreciate that she and his brother have been doing this to help him. He's just annoyed at the fact they've lost and the political mess that he now has to clean up. And so when she arrives in Greece, either she's ill when she arrives or she becomes ill while she's there. And so she dies. And Antony doesn't stick around for her to die. He leaves her dying and goes back to Italy to make a new alliance with Octavian. And that's when he marries Octavian's sister, Octavia. So she some kind of illness, we don't know what, but some of the sources, like, oh, she died of a broken heart because Antony dumped her for Cleopatra and then, left her. It's like, I don't think she's that pathetic, but it all happens at the same time, and she does get dumped and left to die by her ungrateful husband. So and Antony is he has good qualities, but he also has some really bad ones, and ingratitude to Fulvia for all the things she did for him, I think, are a pretty big one.
Yes, thank you.
How difficult would it have been for a woman to hang on to her money or to control her money within this rat's nest of marriages?
So it depends on exactly how you were married. So there are several different types of marriage in ancient Rome, and there is an old traditional one where the wife becomes a member of the husband's family, which means that all of her property becomes his. And so if at a subsequent point in time he decides to be rid of her, he gets to keep everything, and she's left with nothing. And for some reason, this type of marriage increasingly falls out of favour as time goes on. People don't, so by the time that Fulvia is living in the 1st century BCE, people aren't doing it anymore. Yeah, can't think why. And it causes a sort of knock-on problem, for there are certain types of very traditional priesthood where you have to have been married in this old-fashioned way to be this particular priest. So the flamen dialis is one such role. And so there are periods where there aren't any people that can do it because there isn't anyone that's done the right marriage. So another type of marriage is the wife remains a member of her birth family and gets to keep her cash. And so this becomes much more appealing. Later on, if you have 3 children, you get to keep control of your money, and you technically have to be overseen by a man to make sure you don't spend it on silly things. But realistically, that's just a formality. So there are different ways that women can hang on to their money. And so for Fulvia, there are several different options. And having a strong personality, I think, is probably quite important here as well. And having husbands that are out of Rome for long periods. So if your husband is a provincial governor and he's away for 2 or 3 years across the other side of the empire, he's not keeping an eye on what you're spending your money on. So yeah, you want him gone. You want him off doing something administrative or military and out of your hair.
Fair enough.
and her husbands generally were.
More questions? Oh yes, just up at the back there.
It's like being interrogated, isn't it?
I know,
the light.
It's really bright from down here. Thank you.
It actually is like being interrogated because we were being questioned as well as having lights shined in our eyes.
Thanks very much for your talk. I wonder, you've got all these different sources from archaeological evidence to written evidence. Which do you find the most useful for sort of understanding her as a person, and also what do you find most challenging about conducting research on this sort of history 2,000 years ago?
That's a really good question, because they all come with their challenges. So we have more written information about Fulvia than we have any other woman of that period. But it's all written in histories. We don't have a lovely sort of tombstone with her sort of funerary speech or anything like that on it. Whereas for other women much lower down the social scale, we know nothing else about them. They didn't make it into the history books, but we have inscriptions that give us their biographies and other information. So it really is... My approach to doing something like this is that I try and find everything I possibly can. I try and find all the ancient literature, all the inscriptions, all the coins, all the sort of archaeology, and try and build up a picture with all of them, because I find them quite complementary a lot of the time. I mean, I am by sort of background more of an archaeologist, so I like things I can touch, I guess. So the bullets for me, they're fantastic. And of course, when you hold something like that, you think, this was inside someone's body at some point. You know, the reason that this has survived is because it was fired during wartime, and it probably it killed somebody. But it does kind of make it a bit more sort of real and vivid for you. I think you have to take all of it actually very carefully, very cautiously. You have to judge it based on the sort of the pros and cons of it. And if you find things that contradict each other, so not all of our sources for Fulvia tell us the same things. So are any of them true? Or are they all kind of, I mean, not just Fulvia actually, a lot of our ancient sources tell us contradictory things about a particular battle or a particular event, and so you have to try and reconcile all of that. The most depressing thing about being an ancient historian actually is the thought that it might all be lies. And then you just think, oh God, what have I done with my life? You know, I'll never know the truth. But I try and stop thinking that before I get started. I do envy people who work on later periods of history, who have much more source material of all kinds. Although I do not envy future historians of the early 21st century, because they will have too much stuff. And a lot of it will be absolute rubbish. So yeah, you know, pros and cons.
Oh, yes, I have a question here, and then we have one right up at the very back. Thank you.
She had a road named after her, didn't she?
She has a city temporarily renamed after her. The Romans, they do name their roads after the original family of the person who built them. So you might be...
Fulvia.
No, I don't know about that one. Where's that?
Well, the Italian manufacturer Lancia always named their cars after roads that were tested on, like the Via Flaminia or
Right.
Via Appia. And they brought out in the late 60s, early 70s a fantastic sports coupe called Lancia Fulvia.
I've seen that on Instagram. Whenever I search Fulvia, I get both my book and I get a lot of cars. So that's named after her specifically, as opposed to her family.
In theory, the roads then
Yeah.
whether it was built during the Republic.
We get the Romans name their roads. So the Via Appia, funnily enough, Clodius is murdered on the Via Appia, and the Via Appia was built by one of his ancestors. So there's this kind of amusing sort of historical sort of schadenfreude, I suppose, that you could take from that. So as far as the Via Fulvia is concerned, I mean, I've not read anything about it being about her specifically, but that would be interesting to know if it was, or if she does have ancestors who are consuls and quite important. So it might be a Fulvius who is one of her ancestors rather than her specifically. But yeah, it is nice to look at the cars and think, yeah, you know, they are quite nice cars.
And there was one just up at the back, wasn't there? Could we have just a microphone up there? Thank you so much. Teamwork with the microphone, excellent stuff. Thank you.
We're bringing everyone together, you know.
Yeah, we are really, aren't we?
I just thought I'd see how far I could make the mic come. Just on the topic of how she looked after her husband's affairs when they were away, do we know how she did this and how she wielded that power? And if she did do it well, what was it that made her do it well?
We do know about this because Cicero writes about it in great detail because he is outraged at how dare she. So basically what happens when you are an influential Roman, you have your lovely house and you have the space in your house, the atrium is the entranceway. People come and wait there, and depending on how important they are, they get to go sort of further into the house, into the private rooms. And so when Antony is away and Fulvia is sort of running things in his stead, Cicero gets very irate about the fact that there's politics and international diplomacy going on in the women's quarters, and that Fulvia is filling her weaving basket, because all Roman women are supposed to weave, and they're just supposed to sit around weaving on the loom in the atrium, and she's filling her basket with gold instead of wool, and so she it seems, is operating out of her house. You know, she's inviting people to come to her, so that means that if she is the highest status person, people are coming to her to sort of pay homage and to ask her for favours, and she's giving out, there are client kingdoms in the east, and the kings of those kingdoms are coming to her to get support, and so all these things that she's doing from home that Cicero is cross about and tells us that she shouldn't be doing. And we also have a story about women. So women apparently do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Like women talk to other women and then they intercede with their husbands on behalf of their female friends, because it wouldn't be seemly for women to go and do it openly. So while Fulvia's doing stuff openly, the other Roman women of her sort of status are sneaking around and stuff like that. And apparently on one occasion, the women go to Fulvia because they want something. And she basically laughs in their faces and tells them to get out and won't help them. And so she is being much more, she's doing things that in a male way, and out in the open, and the sort of the diplomacy and the politics, rather than a female way, which is sort of, you know, coffee mornings and quiet chit-chat, stuff like that. And it doesn't endear her to men, and it doesn't endear her to women. So they're all out to get her.
We have time for a couple more questions. Yes, one right here. Thank you.
Yeah, just brought on by that, basically. If it doesn't endear her to anyone, why doesn't she sort of, because it doesn't seem like a kind of society where if you're making lots of enemies, you're going to survive for a very long time. So, like, why do we know, like, why she keeps going instead of, like, not necessarily, do you see what I mean? Like, not necessarily going back in the kitchen, as it were, but, like...
I think in this period, you would pretty much, everybody comes to a horrible premature death. You know, it's a dangerous period. There are gangs in the street. There are cases of mistaken identity where people are murdered in the street. This is, you know, men and women as well. They come to sort of violent, unfortunate ends. And I think one of her motivations potentially is this idea of sort of making hay while the sun shines. You know, she has already lived through the murder of one husband and then the death in battle of another husband, and Antony being on the run as a public enemy, and people sort of attacking her and trying to take away, you know, her money and her land and her property and threatening her children. And so I think in this sort of scenario, I think it's sort of kill or be killed, dog eat dog. And I think as well, when she was in the position where Antony was the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, he was after Caesar's death, he was the most senior member of the triumvirate. And there is that sense of, well, I've reached the top. I'm going to stay here forever. And of course, yeah, it's someone else is always trying to you know, knock you off so that they can be at the top. Because Roman politics is a zero-sum game. You know, you can only succeed if someone else fails, and you sort of have to, you know, get rid of them so that they can't get you. I mean, I think it's quite nice in a way. I mean, again, we don't have, the sources don't tell us specifically, but clearly she really did not care what a lot of people thought of her. And that's refreshing, considering how much, you know, women in various periods of history have really needed to care about that.
It's refreshing in a way. I was just thinking, why would you put yourself into more danger, in a sense? But, I mean, what you're saying makes sense.
If you can make yourself the most powerful, the person that no one wants to mess with, then that is protection in a sense. So I think possibly that was what she was trying to do: protect herself, protect her husbands, protect her children, protect her money, and it was successful for a time.
And I guess the alternative, of course, as you're saying, the kind of zero-sum game, if you are at the top, the only place to go is down. Right?
Yes. Yeah, it's like, what is that expression? You play the Game of Thrones and you win or you die.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Do we have time for a final, anyone have a burning question they'd like to ask? Oh, I don't see any hands. as such, I will very quickly use chair's privilege. And you've mentioned Cleopatra a couple of times, obviously, another very impressive, very popular woman. And you have one
Not
book.
popular with the Romans, it
Well,
must be
no,
said.
famously not. You have one book about Cleopatra's daughter, and you have another coming out that also focuses kind of around Cleopatra's other female relations. Do you want to just chat about that? Very briefly?
Yes. It's funny. I've ended up in a position of writing about Antony's female relatives rather than Antony himself. So Cleopatra's daughter is about the daughter of Cleopatra and Antony. So her name is Cleopatra Selene, and she goes from being an Egyptian princess during the lifetime of her mother, with a future view of ruling Egypt herself, to then being a Roman prisoner and sort of stuck in Rome in the house of her father's ex-wife and her brother, who was the man, of course, who ended the lives and reigns of her parents. But then she becomes queen of an African country herself, and she has a very happy successful marriage with an African king.
Lovely.
So she ends up having a happy ending of a kind after all of that. And yes, Cleopatra herself, there is so much to the story of Cleopatra that is not generally told in sort of the sort of TV, film, novel, the pop culture recreations. And one of those things is that Cleopatra had two sisters who were also queens of Egypt and were also trying to stave off Rome in the period immediately before Cleopatra's reign and sort of during Cleopatra's reign. And so there are all these women doing incredible things in this period who have been largely overlooked by, if ancient historians talked about them, they talked about them in a very negative sense, and they've sort of been largely ignored since, because we look at history with the benefit of hindsight. Oh, that person's not important because they only reigned for 2 years or 3 years or whatever. But as we know from our modern politics, you don't have to be prime minister very long to do some very impactful things. And the same is true of ancient politicians and monarchs as well. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jane, and thank you for all your questions and your attention. I'm sure you'll all want the opportunity to purchase the book from independent Fox Lane Books here. I have read the book, I can vouch for its quality, and Jane has very kindly offered to stay and sign copies.
And answer more questions.
And answer more questions. So I hope you'll all join me once more in thanking Jane. Thank you for coming.